Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint yellow cat eyes in acrylics. Now the first thing that I like to do is map in where the pupil should be and then the outside shape of the eye. The size of the eye, the shape of the pupil, all of that is very important because if that's slightly wrong it will adjust the expression of that animal. So once I'm happy with that and I know that's accurate, I can then map in my base layer. Now here I am just using an opaque layer. Now an opaque layer means that it's going to hide more of that background or any existing layers of paint underneath. The more transparent that colour is, which can be either by that specific colour, some brands of acrylic paint are more transparent than others, or maybe if you've added more water to your mixture that will also make it more transparent. But for the base layer of this eye, I have included more of my titanium white within that mixture, which has made it more opaque and helped to cover up that beige background. Now once that layer is dry, this is where I can start to build up the depth and the shape of the eye. So here I'm adding a second layer of that first colour just to make sure that I have completely hidden and covered up that background colour. Now if you're working with a darker background, you may need to add that second or potential third layer depending on how much water you've got in that first mixture. But as long as you've hidden that background colour, that's my main aim here. Now the second stage of this is starting to build up the shading and then aim for that three-dimensional sphere shape of the eye. So this is where I now want to be starting to hint at more of my shadows on the outside edge of that iris. Now when you're building up the sphere shape of the eye, where the darks are is really important. You can see here that I haven't jumped to putting in my darkest value first, and I'm going to be building that up in stages, just as the same way as I am here with the highlight at the lower part of the eye. Now if you have a look at the eye on the left hand side that is complete, you can see just how dark the top section of that eye actually is, but I need to be building that up gradually. Now in order to achieve that soft shaded effect, you've got a couple of options. Now as we know, acrylics can dry quite quickly, so we need to be making sure that we are using a combination of techniques that allows for that paint to be blended and give you a little bit more of that oil paint finish. And it can be achieved with acrylics, but it does need to be sort of used in the right way. So the first method that you can use, and all of these I talk about in my in-depth tutorials on Patreon. So because this tutorial is available all in real time, there are no sections sped up or cut out, and I'm talking while I'm creating the painting. Everything is explained in the moment. I'm able to really go in depth in exactly how to use your brushes to achieve this really soft blended look. But the first thing you could do is actually use wet on wet blending techniques. And now that's where you allow the paint that you're applying on top to mix in with the wet layer of paint underneath. This does work really well, but you do have to work fairly quickly with your acrylics in order to do that. Now the other thing you can do is put a layer of water over the top once you've applied a layer of paint, and that will help to keep that first layer wet so that when you reapply your darker layer on top, you can then use your slightly damp brush to blend those two areas together. Now the other option is, as I'm using here, is I'm applying the paint with a small round brush, and then I'm using a slightly damp brush to drag that paint into the layer underneath. Now the important thing about that technique is you do want to make sure that the base layer or any of the layers underneath are completely dry, because with that damp brush that doesn't have any paint on, as that's got that water within that, you will potentially lift up any wet layers that are underneath. So that's something to be really, really careful of. But as you can see, using a combination of that technique with the damp brush and wet on wet blending techniques, you can get some real beautiful, soft, well transitioned light to dark areas with acrylics that look just like oils. Now something that I've briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video is the use of layers. Now again, this is something that I speak thoroughly about in my in-depth tutorials on Patreon, which if they are of interest, I'll link that in the description below. But the layers here are how I feel I build up more depth in my paintings. Now layers is not just about the lights and the darks. For me, it's also about using glazes to adjust the colour of that area that I'm working on. Now I do have a video here on YouTube that focuses purely on glazes. What are they, how I use them in my paintings, and I've got many different examples in that tutorial where I'm using glazes for different effects. So if that's of interest, I'll link that in the description below. Now the wonderful thing about working with glazes is we don't have to worry about mixing the exact colour at every single stage. So for instance, this highlight that I've just added here to the left eye, if I felt that I needed to have a bit more of a stronger yellow colour, I could wait for that light mixture to dry and then add a glaze over the top to adjust that colour within seconds. It's a really great way of using our acrylics. Now again, because colour selection, how to mix our paint, knowing what colour we should be picking in our reference photo and then mixing that on our palette is one of the questions that I'm asked more frequently. I do make sure to cover that in my in-depth tutorials on Patreon. So here's a photo of my finished painting, a close-up here, and you can really see how I've built up all of the depth, the lighting, the sphere shape of the eye, and that beautiful bright highlight at the top of both eyes has really helped to make the eye look three-dimensional. So again, this is why the contrast, your lights and your darks, is so important. If I didn't have my darks really dark here and my highlights nice and bright, the eyes or any part of the painting would look really flat. So this is always my main priority and my main focus first, and then I can adjust my colour later on, as I've just mentioned with the use of glazes. So I really hope that this video has been useful. If you've got any art related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below. And if this video was helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. And I do upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then hit the subscribe and the bell button. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to be uploading another video here to YouTube in the next few days.